Well, now I apologise for a few technical problems we've had, but let's continue. A little earlier, I spoke to Scotland's First Minister, Alex Salmond, and I asked him if he was prepared to go ahead with a referendum, regardless of whether it was constitutionally acceptable to London.
Well, a consultative referendum, we believe, is within the province of the Parliament. I note that the Professor of Constitutional Law at Edinburgh University has said today he agrees with us. It's perfectly within the province of the Parliament. What we object to is this extraordinary attempt by Downing Street, by the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, to start pulling the strings of the Scottish referendum, remote control from London in a sort of Thatcher-esque manner. We think these days are over, and Mr Cameron and Mr Osborne would be well advised to recognise the new reality where Scotland votes democratically for something to be done, and what is done is fashioned and made and decided by the people of Scotland, not Tories and Downing Street.
Just so that people can get a sort of idea of what really is going on here, can I ask you a series of just very quick-fire questions? For example, what will the currency be? Euro, pound or Scottish pound?
Keep sterling until such time as the people of Scotland decide otherwise.
Now, on oil, revenues veer between 6.5 billion in 2010 and as high as 12 billion in earlier years. All of that has been regarded as British oil. How will you divide it?
Well, the geographical share of North Sea oil, that's in the Scottish continental shelf, would accrue to Scotland. What is in the English continental shelf would accrue to England. It's certainly true that with a share, or a proper share of our own resources, Scotland would be the sixth most prosperous country in the developed world at the present moment. But of course, because, well, currently it's about 90% of the field, that's the revenue-bearing oil and gas fields, are in Scottish waters. But of course we make no claim on gas or perhaps shale gas to come in English waters and English territory. That's the resources of England. We just ask for the resources of Scotland.
We've obviously got a big difficulty with our national debt as Britain, as the United Kingdom. Once you separate off as an independent country, what proportion of the £9.4 trillion national debt will you regard as Scotland's?
Well, it's heading towards a trillion on the national debt at the present moment. You mustn't exaggerate even the amazing debts that have been piled up by Tory and Labour incompetence in Westminster
but just
administration.
Give me a percentage.
Anyway, take the percentage, yeah. John. You do it either on a GDP share or a population share in negotiations. I'm afraid we're going to have to bear our fair share of the Treasury incompetence.
What is that? What is that fair share?
I think, either GDP or population share, John. But the point
well, that would be about 9%, agreed?
Well, that's about just over 8% in terms of population. But that would leave us with a lower debt per GDP than, for example, the UK has at the present moment.
Two very quick final questions, Alex Salmond. One, how on earth can you justify taking 90% of UK assets after independence and saying, right, OK, fine, they're Scottish, and at the same time saying, and we'll only take 9% of the debt?
Because it's not the assets of the past. The debt has been accumulated in the past, John. You know, there's been £250,000 million of North Sea oil has gone straight to the Treasury over the last 25... Well, I'm making the point, John, over the last 25 to 30 years. We're not going to ask for our share of that back, unfortunately.
OK, but what about the banks? So what about the banks? Royal Bank of Scotland, £180 billion of exposure. That's what the British government has to that bank. Now, when you wrote to Fred Goodwin in May 2007, you said it's in Scottish interest for RBS to be successful. The implication of your letter very much was it was a Scottish bank for the Scottish nation. Is it still, and will you take those debts?
Well, obviously, the people responsible for that, just as the people that took the corporation tax over the Royal Bank of Scotland were the London Treasury. And unfortunately, they were also responsible for regulating, or at least misregulating, the financial sector as well. I'm afraid people have to take the responsibility for the past mistakes they've made.
Let me put it to you this way as a final question. If you want Scottish oil, and you may well have some right to it, then surely people in the rest of the UK have the right to demand of you that you take the Scottish proportion of bank failure. We'll take the rest. There's plenty of it.
Well, look, the argument, as I understand it, from Westminster politicians, is that Scotland is a poor wee subsidised place that gets too much spending. You would think they'd be queuing up to say, OK, go off and stand on your own 2 feet. Instead, they're conspiring like anything to try and hang on to us. They're doing that because basically they want to keep a hold of Scottish resources. But I think far more in fairness, why don't we have a situation where Scotland raises its own money, it's responsible for our own spending, England does the same thing, and we can exist in friendship as 2 friendly neighbours as opposed...
Alex Salmond talking to John earlier.